Welcome back to Relay Theology, and welcome back to the Hiddenness Series, where we are now evaluating responses to Schellenberg's argument. As you probably know, one common strategy for objecting to the Hiddenness argument is to identify some good thing such that for the sake of it God may hide, and by hide I mean allow non-resistant non-belief. Now, if such a good can be identified and some additional conditions met, that would potentially spell the end of the Hiddenness argument. Now, in this video, I want to take a look at one such attempt by philosopher Richard Swinburne, as well as a further development on Swinburne's general idea by philosopher Travis Dumsday. On page 217 of Providence and the Problem of Evil, Richard Swinburne writes,
"Any goal which is good for humans to pursue is, I argued in Chapter 5, especially good if they pursue it cooperatively. In the pursuit of this very great good, the knowledge of God, it is good that humans cooperate in investigation when none have found the great good, and when some have found it, and others have not, that those who have found should try to help those who have not to find it. What a good thing it is that those who know should be able to teach those who do not, in all matters, but above all in this most important of matters."
Swinburne continues,
"If God is to give us the great good of helping each other to find him, he must make a lot of us ignorant of him over a long period. And, given the way generations inevitably depend largely on previous generations for their knowledge, and what a good thing it is that parents are of such use, that means that there must be generations and cultures ignorant of God, if the human race are to be of immense use to each other in this way."
So for Swinburne, God hides because it is good that people cooperatively inquire into the truth of God's existence, and also take responsibility for the good of others by spreading belief in God to them. Now, this has been called the responsibility objection to the argument from divine hiddenness. In reply to this general good identifying approach, of which again the responsibility objection is but one example, Schellenberg writes, quote, "But first let's notice that if the most fundamental spiritual reality is a personal God, then all serious spiritual development must begin in what I have emphasized, namely personal relationship with God. Second, such a relationship with an infinitely rich personal reality would have to be the greatest good any human could possibly experience, if God exists. But then, one wants to ask, why this talk of some other good, for the sake of which God might sacrifice such a relationship?" Here, Schellenberg's criticism is one about value comparison. If relationship with God is a good above all others, why would a perfectly rational and good being such as God seek a separate good, which we are assuming for the sake of argument entails that for some, God shuts the door on them, keeping them from their greatest good? Schellenberg also supplements this more general point by noting that paradoxically many of the goods offered up by those critical of the Hiddenness argument are goods whose fullest and most complete expression only becomes available after belief in or personal relationship with God has begun. Moreover, Schellenberg writes, quote, "What at bottom is at stake here? Presumably, it is dedication to a supremely worthwhile intellectual cause, perhaps in cooperation with others, being responsible for and caring deeply about the intellectual and spiritual well-being of others, and being helped by others in such an important matter, knowing they have risked life and limb to provide such help to you. These are good things, but they can be realized in a variety of ways. What we are really looking at here are good types, of which the specific goods associated with the acquisition of theistic belief are but tokens. But then if there are other tokens of these types, would not a God desiring to make explicit relationships possible be moved in their direction? More to the point, is not a plethora of such goods already going to be present in any world at all like ours created by God? In an evolving world in which humans have free will, and in which the directions of the world's development are to some extent determined by how they use it, there must always be occasion for dedication and great discoveries to be made. great investigations and great cooperative endeavors to be undertaken, great responsibility for how things work out, great opportunities to be of use and to be experienced as such. What need, then, for the doubtfulness of theism? However, Travis Dumsday of Concordia University of Edmonton argues that the responsibility argument can be improved, reformulated so as to sidestep Schellenberg's replies here. His formulation pays special attention to how Schellenberg understands personal relationships. Now recall that by personal relationship, Schellenberg means a conscious and reciprocal relationship that is positively meaningful, allowing for deep sharing. Here, Dumsday does not object to what Schellenberg says such a relationship must include or allow for. He just thinks that the picture is incomplete. For Dumsday, a relationship with God must also include a friendship with God. He then notes that generally friendship includes common interests and goals. Friends have aims that they can pursue together, goals that they can work toward. God has certain goals and we are to cooperate with God in fulfilling those goals, unquote. One of those goals is the goal of bringing others to a belief in God. Dumsday continues, the responsibility of some to teach others about God is not a good that can be contrasted and set against the good of being in relationship with God. Rather, this cooperative work is partially constitutive of being in relationship with God, unquote. So Dumsday's strategy here is to say, yes, God, being perfectly loving, seeks and is therefore open to personal relationship with some of his loved ones, but importantly, not others. For God's friendship with the former group may at times require God's hiding, at least temporarily, from the latter group. Now this is, I think, a deeply troubling vision of what it means to love another person. Suppose a new mother, Martha, abandons her first child by leaving them at the door of an orphanage with a note attached falsely reporting that the child's mother has died in childbirth. The foreseeable result is that the child grows up and, as a result of the note, forms the belief that their biological mother is dead on that basis. Suppose also that Martha claims to love this child. Now, this might strike some, I think, as absurd, but hold on, we can imagine scenarios where that's possible. Perhaps Martha feels unworthy of being a mother, perhaps because she suffers from an addiction or some crippling mental illness, rendering her, in her own judgment at least, unable to properly care for a child. She may lovingly think that it's better that her child thinks she's dead so that the child never even attempts to search her out for a relationship. That might explain Martha's behavior and be consistent with Martha loving that child. So there's no problem there. But of course, that's nothing like Dumsday's proposal. If we apply Dumsday's understanding of what can fall into the category of loving behavior, things begin to look radically different. On his view, there's nothing unloving about Martha abandoning her child so that she could, years later, during a friendship with her second child, work with them on the common goal of seeking out and locating that first child. I find this view of love to be deeply confused. This parent would almost certainly be shamed by any morally serious individual. Indeed, we take perpetual openness to relationships for granted, even in our imperfect expressions of human love. It is all the more puzzling, then, when we see one's standards for loving behavior sitting squarely in the gutter when infinite divine persons are under consideration. To sum up so far, even if cooperative projects are a very good thing, as Swinburne and Dumsday assume, that goodness cannot give a lover a reason to hide their existence from their loved one, even if some particular cooperative project might require it. In fact, one might further argue that any goodness arising from a cooperative and successful investigation is deeply cheapened by the fact that the requisite ignorance was manufactured. Now, to be clear, it makes sense that in a metaphysically ambiguous world like ours, we would need to put in some work to uncover the truth about the deepest level of reality. Insofar as the result of that investigation allows us to then be in a position to, say, access our greatest good, that investigation would be obviously a uniquely good thing. But what about worlds unlike our own? What about worlds where the deepest metaphysical truth is not ambiguous? Worlds where it is apparent to everyone apart from those engaged in self-deceptive resistance. Well then, investigation into obvious truths would not have so much value. Swinburne and Dumsday, in holding investigation into God's existence is of supreme value, assume that if God exists, he must create a world relevantly like ours, one of religious ambiguity. But that doesn't provide an answer to the hiddenness argument so much as it just assumes the argument to be unsound. On to my last point. Let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that contrary to what I've just argued, cooperative investigation into God's existence and a responsibility to spread belief in God's existence to others is worth God's hiding for the sake of those goods. Now, if we grant that basic value judgment, we're still left with the question of whether such goods do in fact require God's hiddenness. Both Swinburne and Dumsday appear convinced that they do, but I want to argue that they've focused too narrowly on non-resistant non-belief. Indeed, I believe Schellenberg misses an opportunity here to press his accommodation strategy even further. While the hiddenness argument claims that the existence of non-resistant non-believers is incompatible with the existence of a perfectly loving God, it does not say that the existence of resistant non-believers is, and yet their existence perfectly allows for the goods in question. In worlds where God exists and has created finite persons, some of them may use their free choice to, over time, self-deceptively deceive themselves about whether God exists and come to fail to believe in God. Such persons are resistant non-believers. Their non-belief is the result of their resistance to God. However, nothing in the hiddenness argument states that such persons would be permanently frozen in that state, and that means that they are perfectly positioned to serve as the individuals for whom the believers may be responsible. They could exercise the relevant form of responsibility by befriending the resistant and demonstrating the love of God through their own behavior, or God could, in the context of his friendship with such believers, place them in positions and equip them with strategies likely to soften the hearts of the resistant, allowing them to over time slowly open their eyes again to the reality of God. Perhaps this will require first lovingly and sensitively helping them to recall other related truths that their resistance has since blocked from view, like, for example, publicly available evidence or argument. Or perhaps it will require further clarifying the concept of God under consideration. Still, others may require a more therapeutic approach, allowing them to reinterpret and integrate their experiences up to that stage in their life. The key point is this: even if we grant that the goods of cooperative investigation and of helping others to learn that God exists are extremely valuable, and we've again seen reasons to doubt this, they don't require God's hiding from the non-resistant, and so they cannot solve the problem of divine hiddenness. Thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe to keep up with future content. Music is by Casserole, a Chicago-based band, and used with permission. If you appreciate the content and the tone of what Relay Theology does, defending atheistic philosophy online, consider making a small recurring donation to our Patreon for early access to our content and other opportunities. Comments, questions, criticisms, or requests can be sent in audio form to relaytheology@gmail.com for possible inclusion in future episodes. We want to, of course, thank our patrons: Bike Mearns, Charles Hoffer, Jason, Robin Willems, Ed Atkinson, Kim Bishkovsky, Anthony Lawson, and Brandon McCleary. Thanks for watching. Again, please hit subscribe.